The letter arrived on a Wednesday, which was significant only in that it arrived at all. It had been 11 months since he had last written to her, not 11 months since their last conversation. They had spoken in that interval, at the occasions that required it, in the house they still technically shared for the portion of each year that his estate business brought him north. But 11 months since he had directed words at her privately in the particular and now unfamiliar form of ink on paper that required a person to choose what they meant before they committed to it. She read it standing at the window of the room she had made her own in the east wing, the one that received the morning light before any other room in the house that she had claimed in the first winter, not because it was offered, but because she had understood early that in this marriage, as in most things, what was not claimed would not be given. The letter was brief. It said he would be arriving at the end of the month, and that he hoped she was well. That was all it said. It said nothing about the 11 months. It said nothing about the 3 seasons that had passed since he had last found reason to sit in the same room with her for any purpose other than the formal requirements of a shared name. It said nothing about the garden she had built, the library she had quietly repopulated, the tenant's account she had begun reviewing when it became apparent that no one else was doing so with any real attention. It said nothing about any of the things she had done or become or built in the absence of his noticing. It said he hoped she was well. She set the letter on the writing desk. She looked at the morning light on the grounds below, the east garden she had shaped over 2 summers into something that was genuinely hers now, something that would still be there in 10 years, regardless of what either of them did next. She was well. That was not the word she would have chosen for what she was, but it would do for the purposes of a man who had spent 3 seasons asking nothing more specific than that. This is a story about what a woman builds when she is given silence as her only material, about the particular and underestimated power of a person who has stopped waiting for permission and started working with what she has. And it is, in the end, about what happens when the man who gave her the silence finally arrives to find that what she has made of it is not what he expected, not the careful management of an absence, not the patient holding of space until his return, but a life complete and particular and entirely her own. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the bell because this story does not move in the direction that easy stories move, and the part of it that changes everything has not arrived yet. Stay from the beginning. She had come to the Ashfordton estate as a woman of careful intelligence and significant practical capability who had understood, before the carriage reached the gate, that she was arriving at a place where neither of those qualities had been particularly requested. The arrangement between her family and his had been, in the precise sense of the word, an arrangement, a transaction of mutual convenience executed with the minimum of ceremony and the maximum of legal precision, conducted by 2 sets of advisers on behalf of 2 people who had met 3 times before the papers were signed and had exchanged nothing more revealing than the remarks that 3 such meetings conventionally produced. She did not come to the marriage with sorrow or with grievance. She was too practical for unearned sorrow and too clear-eyed for grievance directed at a situation she had understood before she entered it. What she came with was the reasonable intention of building a life inside whatever structure she was given, which was what intelligent women in her position did and had always done, and which required a particular combination of adaptability and self-possession that she had, over 26 years of being exactly who she was in rooms that had not always welcomed it, developed into something close to an art. The structure she was given, it became apparent within the first weeks, was more skeletal than she had been led to believe. The estate was real and substantial. The house was large and not unmaintained. The staff was competent in the way of people who have managed things for a long time without clear direction. And the Duke was, in all the ways that were externally visible, a man of standing and capability who managed his holdings with the attention that substantial holdings require. What the estate did not have was anyone attending to it in the particular way that a place attended to only functionally is never quite attended to. The tenants' concerns were received and filed. The household accounts were kept, but not reviewed with any real interest in what they were saying. The grounds were maintained in the sense that they did not become ungovernable, but not in the sense that anyone had thought about what they might become if they were given some direction. The library held books that had been placed there some years prior and not meaningfully added to since. And the house itself, this was the thing she noticed first, before she had been there a week, had the quality of a place that was functioning rather than living, maintained rather than inhabited, kept in order by people who had been trained to keep things in order without anyone having recently considered what order was for. She began without announcement and without anyone asking her to attend to it. The tenants first, because they were the most pressing, and because she understood estate accounts well enough to read what the ledgers were recording without quite saying, which was that certain properties had been sitting with unaddressed maintenance issues for longer than was either comfortable or sensible. She went with the land steward on a Tuesday in her second month, a man named Aldous, who had been managing the estate's day-to-day affairs for 11 years with the resigned efficiency of someone who has learned not to require support from above. He had received her request to accompany him with the careful neutrality of a man who has been doing this work long enough to have been approached by well-meaning people before and to have been, on most of those occasions, disappointed. She was not a disappointment. She asked the right questions, which were specific, rather than general. And she listened to the answers with the full attention of someone who was going to use what she heard, and she made notes in the small book she carried that were organized in the way of a person who intended to follow through. Aldous had looked at her on the third property they visited with an expression that was the beginning of something she recognized as cautious professional regard, and he had begun for the first time in perhaps years to talk about the estate as though he expected to be heard. She was. He revised his understanding of the situation within the month. The library was the next order of business, and the library took longer because it was a more personal thing, the choices more revealing of what she thought and what she valued, and she made them deliberately, acquiring over the course of the first autumn a selection of volumes that reflected a mind that had been reading seriously and widely for 26 years, and that intended to continue doing so. She organized them in the way that she organized everything, which was according to an internal logic that had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with use, and she placed the chair from the upstairs corridor in the window that received the afternoon light, and she made of the library a room that was actually for reading rather than a room that contained books. He used the library on his visits. He had not, she knew from Aldous and from the quiet observations of the household staff, used it consistently before she arrived. She did not examine this too closely. She had not made it for him. She had made it because she needed a library, and this was the room that was available to become one. The garden was the third and longest project, and the one that was most completely hers in the particular sense of something that had not existed before her arrival, and would not exist without her continued attention. The East Garden had been a field of managed grass when she found it, maintained to the precise and uninspired standard of ground staff who have been told to keep things presentable and have accordingly kept them presentable, and nothing more. She spent the first spring learning it, its drainage, its light, the way the frost came in from the north in early November and left in late March, the particular soil of the eastern beds that was richer than the rest and would support something more demanding than grass. She planted in the second spring, modestly and precisely, with the restraint of someone who understands that gardens do not hurry and that the attempt to make them hurry produces neither speed nor good gardens. By the second summer, the east beds were showing what she had understood they were capable of. By the third autumn, the garden had become the thing she had believed it could be from the beginning. A place with its own character, its own internal logic, alive in the particular way of things that have been thought about seriously by someone who intended to be there to watch them develop. She was there, he was not, or was infrequently, and when he was, he moved through the estate with the comfortable brevity of a man who has no reason to look closely, because he has always assumed that things are being attended to. They were being attended to, by her specifically and by Aldous, and by the staff who had found in the past 3 seasons something they had not previously had, which was the sense that someone in the house was actually paying attention to what they were doing, and that the attention was not punitive but engaged. The quality of the estate had changed. It was a better run place than it had been when she arrived. This was not a small thing. It was, in the accounting of estates and land, and the people who depended on them, a significant thing, and it had happened because she had arrived with no particular instruction and had decided, in the absence of instruction, to do what needed doing. He did not know. Not because no one had told him. Aldous had told him, in the plain and factual way that Aldous communicated everything, that the estate's management had improved considerably in the past year and a half, and that the tenants were in better circumstances, and that several properties had been repaired and re-tenanted at improved terms. He had received this information and had thanked Aldous, and had moved on to the next item, which was the land question in the Western Quarter that had been occupying his attention for most of the previous month. He had not asked who had been reviewing the accounts. He had assumed Aldous. He had not been paying enough attention to his own estate to understand that the change in its management corresponded precisely with the timeline of his wife's arrival. If you have been building something for 3 seasons while someone else assumed it was simply the weather, you already understand what she knew in a way that explanation cannot improve. Subscribe to this channel now, because what comes next is the month of his return, and the return is not what either of them expected, and this story is only halfway through the part that matters. Turn on the bell. Do not find it halfway. He arrived on the 28th, a day earlier than the letter had indicated, which was either a logistical adjustment or a decision made closer to the departure than he had admitted to himself, and which she received as the former, while privately noting the possibility of the latter. She was in the east garden when the carriage came through the gate, kneeling at the far bed with her hands in the soil and a trowel in her right hand, doing the work that November required of a garden that had been built to be worth maintaining. She heard the carriage. She did not go in. She finished what she was doing, which took another quarter-hour, and then she washed her hands at the garden tap and came inside through the east door, and found him in the entrance hall with his coat still on, speaking to the housekeeper about the evening arrangements. He turned when she came in. She understood from his expression, not precisely what he had expected to find at the east door at 3:30 in November, which was information she filed, without comment, alongside the other information she had been filing about him for 3 seasons. She said she was glad he had arrived safely. He said the roads had been reasonable. This was how they spoke. It had been how they spoke for a long time, and neither of them had arranged it deliberately. It was simply what had happened when two people shared a name and a house and almost nothing else, and had grown accustomed to the almost nothing as the whole of what was available. She excused herself to change, and he went with the housekeeper to review whatever he had come north to review, and the house settled around them both in the quiet way of a house that has become, in the course of 3 seasons, entirely accustomed to her presence and is now recalibrating to accommodate his. He noticed the library that evening. She was in it when he came looking for the account books, which were not in the study where he had left them, because she had reorganized the study in his second absence, and he came to the library door and stopped. The account books were there, on the second shelf, where they were logically located if one understood the way the library was organized. He looked at the shelf, and then at the room, and she watched him look at it with the calm, lateral attention of someone who has been watching things for long enough to understand what a person's eyes are doing when they don't know they're being observed. He was seeing it. The way the books were arranged, the quality of the light from the window she had repositioned for afternoon reading, the chair that was not the chair that had been in that window when he left it. He found the account books. He said, without looking away from the shelf, that the library was different. She said she had reorganized it. He said when. She said in the first winter. He had been gone the first winter. He said he had not known that. She said there had been a number of things she had attended to in the intervals, and that she was happy to account for them if it was useful. Something in his expression changed, briefly, and without resolution, and then he took the account books and said he would review them in the study and left. She returned to her reading. In the morning, he went with Aldous. She knew this because she had asked Aldous the previous evening to take the Duke around the East Quarter, properties which were the ones she had worked most closely on, and which would tell him the most clearly legible story about what the past 3 seasons had produced. She had not told Aldous why she was asking. She had not needed to. Aldous understood what she was asking and why, with the pragmatic intelligence of a man who had been watching the estate's transformation from close range and who had his own investment in the Duke's understanding it accurately. They were gone most of the day. She worked in the library in the morning, went to the garden in the afternoon, and was in the east sitting room with her correspondence when she heard the carriage return in the early evening. He came to find her after dinner, not immediately after. She heard him in the study for an hour first, presumably reviewing what the accounts confirmed about what Aldous had shown him, which was that the estate was in meaningfully better condition than it had been when he left it in the spring 18 months prior, and that the condition had not improved by accident. He knocked on the door of the east sitting room, which was also not precisely what she had expected from him, and she said, "Come in." And he came in and sat down in the chair across from her, with the expression of a man who has been doing arithmetic and has arrived at a total that requires him to change other things. He said Aldous had told him about the tenants. She said she had worked with Aldous on the East Quarter properties. Yes, he said, Aldous had made clear that the work had been hers. She said it had seemed necessary. He looked at her for a moment with the direct attention of someone who has understood that they have been looking at something for a long time without seeing it, and who is now trying to correct for that without making the correction obvious, which was not entirely successful, but was, she noted, being attempted. He said he had not known she had been attending to the estate in his absence. She said she had not been certain it required his knowing to be worth doing. He received this without deflection. That was new. She noted it as she noted everything, without drawing a conclusion she had not yet earned the evidence for. He said the library. He said it as a fragment, not a complete sentence, the way a person says a thing when they are not certain what they mean to say about it, but understand that they mean to say something. She said she needed a library that worked, and the library had not been working when she arrived, and she had made it work. He said it was very good now. She said she knew. The quality of the silence that followed this exchange had a different texture than the silences she had been living in for 3 seasons, not warmer, precisely, or not only warmer, but more honest, which was a thing she valued more than warmth because warmth could be performed and honesty was considerably more difficult to manufacture. He was looking at her with a specific expression of a man who is arriving, imperfectly and without a map, at the understanding that the country he thought he was navigating is not the country he is actually in, and that the country he is actually in has been considerably more populated than he knew. She allowed him to arrive there without assistance. This was deliberate. She had spent 3 seasons building things without assistance, and she was not going to begin offering it now as a courtesy to a man who was only just discovering that it had been necessary. He said that he had been gone a great deal. She said that was accurate. He said he understood that a great deal had happened in his absence. She said that was also accurate. He said, with the careful and slightly effortful precision of someone translating from a language they have only recently begun to study, that he was not certain he had understood before this evening what the extent of that was, and that the not understanding was not something he could entirely account for, but that he intended to account for better going forward. This was not an apology. She heard it for what it was, which was the beginning of an apology from a man who did not yet have the full architecture of it assembled, and she received it in proportion to what it was, which was to say that she received it without dismissing it and without elevating it beyond its actual size. She said that she was glad to hear it. She said it in the tone that meant she was glad, and that the gladness was not unconditional, and he heard both parts of that, because he was, she thought, beginning to listen in the particular way that this conversation required. There was a morning in the second week of his visit when she went to the East Garden at the usual hour, and found him already there, standing at the far bed with his hands in his coat pockets and his attention on the dormant beds with the expression of a man who is trying to understand something by looking at it carefully rather than assuming he already knows what it contains. She came to stand beside him. He said he had been trying to understand what it had been when she arrived. She said it had been a managed field. He said he could see that it had been made into something considerably more than that. She said it had taken 2 summers and a significant amount of attention to understand what the soil would support. He asked what she had planted in the far corner, where the winter structure was still visible against the frost. She told him. He listened without interrupting, which was the thing she noticed most, the listening without interrupting, and she was careful not to make too much of it before she had more evidence. But she told him about the garden, the drainage and the light and the long experiment of the eastern beds, and he stood beside her in the November cold and heard it, and asked 2 questions that were the questions of someone genuinely trying to understand, rather than someone waiting for a pause in which to say something else. They went inside for breakfast after that. She poured the tea, and he was at the table, and neither of them said anything for a while, and the quiet was the quiet of 2 people in the same room who are not performing anything, which was a different quiet than the quiet of his absences, or the quiet of his arrivals, or the quiet of the past 3 seasons in general, and she sat with it for a moment before she decided what to do with it. She decided to be honest. She said that she had not known, when she arrived, what the arrangement of their life was going to require of her in practice, that she had understood the theoretical structure, which was a shared name and a shared house, and a set of mutual obligations that would be met at the appropriate occasions, that she had not understood until she was inside it, that the practical reality of the arrangement was that she would be managing an estate and a household and a set of tenant relationships and a library and a garden, largely without direction or support, and that she had done this not because it was requested, but because it was necessary, and that she had built the past 3 seasons of her life out of that necessity. She said she was not presenting this as a complaint. She was presenting it as information which he had demonstrated, over the course of the past week, some willingness to receive, and she was taking him at that willingness. He was quiet for a moment. He said that he understood. He had left her without the support that the situation required. She said that was an accurate description. He said he did not know how to address 3 seasons at once, and that he understood that was also accurate, and that the understanding of it was recent enough that he had not yet determined what it meant in practice. She said she did not need him to address 3 seasons at once. She said she needed him to be honest about what the next season required, and to be present for that conversation, rather than assuming the situation would manage itself, because she had spent 3 seasons watching a situation that was assumed to manage itself, and while it had managed, and managed well, it had done so at a cost that she had been carrying alone, and she was no longer interested in carrying it alone. He looked at her across the breakfast table with the expression that had been developing over the past week, and that she had been watching develop with the careful attention she brought to things that deserved precision, and she found in it what she had been looking for, which was not reassurance and not performance, but the specific quality of a man who has understood something real and is trying to figure out what it requires of him. He said he would like to know what the next season requires. She said she would tell him. He said he would like to be there when she told him, and that he was telling her this not as a promise, but as an intention that he understood she had the right to hold him to. She said that she would. She reached for the tea. He did not leave at the end of the month. This was the first thing that changed, and it changed without announcement, the date of his planned departure, arriving and passing, without the carriage being ordered, without the study being cleared of his papers, without any of the preparations that his departures typically required, and that the household had learned to recognize as the preliminary sequence of an ending. He did not leave. She noted this without commenting on it. He began to come to the garden in the mornings, not every morning, and not yet with the ease of someone who understood its rhythms, but with the increasing frequency of a man who has found that the place he keeps, Returning to is teaching him something he did not know he needed to learn. She let him return. She did not arrange the mornings differently to accommodate him, did not reduce what she was doing or redirect her attention to make room for his arrival. She simply continued doing what she had always done, and he came and stood beside her or sat on the low wall at the garden's edge and watched and occasionally asked questions that were becoming, with each morning, more specific and more genuinely curious, the questions of someone building a body of knowledge rather than making conversation. He came to the library in the evenings. She was usually there. They had not arranged this. It had simply become the shape of the evenings in the way that things become the shape of evenings between two people who are beginning, without having declared it, to occupy the same time and the same space with some regularity. He read on the days he came, or reviewed his correspondence, and she read, and the room had the quality she had known it was capable of from the beginning, which was the quality of a room that two people are both actually in. There was an evening in the third week when he set down what he was reading, and looked at her across the firelight and said her name, not her title. Her name, with the particular weight of a word that has been reconsidered and found to have more in it than its previous usage had honored. She looked up. He said he wanted to say something and that he was not certain he had the right words for it yet, but that he did not want to wait until he had the right words, because he had already waited 3 seasons for things that had not benefited from the leaky waiting. She set down her book. He said he had arrived at this estate 11 months after she had, and had found it different from what he had expected. He said he had found the library reorganized, and the garden made into something from what he understood had been nothing, and the tenant properties in better condition than he had left them, and the accounts more legible than they had been since he had taken over the estate, and the household staff working with a sense of direction they had not previously had. He said he had found all of this, and had spent the first week arriving at the understanding that it was hers, not incidentally or partially hers, but entirely specifically, carefully hers, built over 3 seasons in his absence, and in the specific absence, he understood now, of any expectation that it would be acknowledged. He said he was acknowledging it. He said it inadequately. He understood, and that the inadequacy was in direct proportion to the time it had taken him to arrive at the acknowledgement, but that he was making the acknowledgement because it was true, and because he had been a man who operated by assumption for long enough to understand that assumptions were a method of avoiding the effort of seeing, and that the effort of seeing was something he was intending to make. She was quiet for a moment. The fire moved between them, and the library was warm, and the books on the shelves had the particular settled quality of books that have been placed where they belong. She said that she heard him. She said it in the tone that meant the hearing was real, not performed, and that she was not certain what to do with it yet, and that the uncertainty was honest rather than evasive. He said he was not asking her to know what to do with it. He was simply asking her to know that it had been said. She said she would know that. She said that she had 3 seasons of things she had built that she would like him to know, and that she was willing to show him, and that the showing would take time, because there was a great deal of it, and because she intended to show it properly, rather than quickly. He said he had time. She said she knew. She said she had been the one managing the estate for 3 seasons, and she had a reasonable sense of what his calendar required, and she had already determined that there was enough of the winter available for what she intended to show him if he was willing to attend to it. He said he was willing. She picked up her book. He picked up his. The fire crackled, and the library held them both, and outside the window the east garden waited under its first frost, dormant and particular and entirely hers, for the spring that would show everything she had planted exactly what it was capable of. She had been given 3 seasons of silence, and had made of them a library, a garden, a set of functioning tenant relationships, and the particular, unassailable knowledge that she was capable of far more than anyone in that house had understood when she arrived. She had not built any of it for him. She had built it because it needed building, and because she was the person available to build it, and because a life, even a life lived largely alone, was a life, and she had chosen to make it one. That he was learning, belatedly and imperfectly, to see it was not the point of the building. But it was not nothing, and neither was he, in the slow and honest reckoning of someone who has learned to assess things without the distortion of either hope or disappointment, entirely without possibility. That was where she left it, not resolved, not finished, not handed a conclusion she had not yet earned through evidence. Held, as she had always held difficult things, with the careful patience of someone who understands that the most important things do not hurry, and that the gardens worth having are always the ones that were given the time they needed. If this story reached you, leave a like. It costs nothing, and it tells us that stories like this one deserve to be found. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the bell so the next one arrives from the beginning, because they are always better that way. And if you know someone who has built something extraordinary in the silence they were given and has never been thanked for it, share this with them today. What they built is real. What they built matters. And someday, in the library or the garden or the quiet of an honest evening, someone will finally see it for exactly what it is.